A number of years later, only corporations were held responsible. Corporate reparations actually amounted to 10 times as much as what governments were able to provide to victims. Corporate accountability in transitional justice is critical. Firstly, they've made a profit. They can play a key role in providing reparations to victims. In many situations, like in South Africa, where government provided reparations to victims, a number of years later only corporations were held responsible. Corporate reparations actually amounted to 10 times as much as what governments were able to provide to victims. If we don't hold corporate accountants responsible, we're not getting to the roots of some of these problems. Of course, so many conflicts are driven by profit motives, or where kind of financial resources make it possible to continue a conflict through diamond resources that get exploited. South African example came at an early stage of transitional justice. The TRC in South Africa was set up in 95, 96. And it was innovative in so many ways. I think it's still used by many people as an example of what others can learn from and can copy almost. The mining companies in South Africa were involved directly in drafting the legislation of apartheid, in forced migrations, in making sure that mines were supplied with cheap labor. So they committed the act of the atrocity of apartheid, an international crime recognized by the UN, with zero discussion after the fact that they are responsible for that. So there's a certain sense of they're the most senior responsible people for an international crime not being held responsible. The companies get to rewrite their own history, get to tell their story of how they actually were opposing apartheid. Holding corporations accountable is a tricky question, and I think there's tricky because they're not usually kind of the direct perpetrators. But most critically, perhaps, is the how corporate actors are chameleons who adapt to new environments. As soon as a new government comes on board, they offer shares. There's new deals where the new political elite becomes shareholders in these corporations, where you have a political transition, but you don't necessarily have economic transition. So they immunize themselves by creating alliances with those who are powerful and who may hold them accountable. So they adapt incredibly well to transition. Transitional justice has now kind of taken this issue quite seriously. There are a number of truth commissions who've made it part of their mandate to engage with corporate accountability, to look at social and economic crimes, not just civil and political crimes. There's also a strengthening of the legal framework. So we have, through the UN particularly, international guidelines on business and human rights, where there's very clear principles about their responsibility for providing reparations for victims, where they have some direct responsibility for the suffering. And it's not, there's a responsibility for them to do something, and there's an obligation on the side of the government to hold them responsible. And then as a third element of that, we see the courts becoming much more effective, and particularly civil society, human rights organizations working with survivors are pursuing through courts huge civil claims. Both at a national level and often and probably more effectively through going to the home countries where those corporations are based. I think the next phase of this development is to make survivors the centerpiece of such advocacy, where their stories of what they suffered becomes more visible. That we're not just telling stories about people being tortured by government officials, we're telling stories about people suffering at the hands of corporations. Because I think that is, in some ways, the most kind of the visceral side of transitional justice, is hearing those stories and to link those stories to the actions of corporations. And that also, I think, brings the story home for people across the globe, where how the clothes you wear, the petrol that you use, and that there's a personal responsibility, a link between your actions and the corporations that you utilize, and the victimization that happens across the globe.